If you still feel like the same person despite doing all of the work, meditation, and self-actualization, if you still feel like there's a glass ceiling that you can't break, then this video is for you. Because this goes through all of my challenges, struggles, and successes, all of my insights that took me from being a socially anxious, down on his luck, struggling athlete to being able to help leaders, founders, and entrepreneurs build a life of total harmony and freedom. This is going to be my totally unfiltered 9-year journey, and in it I'm going to be sharing the one thing which I discovered which had the biggest ROI into making me become totally unrecognizable. And a funny story to illustrate this point is recently, maybe a few months ago, I met a woman who I dated when I was in sixth form, so this is a few years before university, and she didn't recognize me at all. That's how deep this work can go, that somebody from your past literally doesn't recognize you anymore because of the person that you've become. Change is possible, and here's how you can leverage my journey into progress of your own. So here's how I took myself from a socially anxious, struggling athlete to helping ambitious leaders, founders, and entrepreneurs build a life and mind of radical freedom and harmony. So here's the hero's journey. It starts with early life foundations. Next chapter is martial arts, social dynamics, and philosophy. The next chapter is the master appears. Then it's meeting the Buddha, feast, famine, and impermanence, going independent, the path deepens, full framework and lineages, and who this channel is for, the call to adventure. So here's the youngest picture that I could find of myself, and this is my early life foundations, okay? So before I was 5, I moved around a lot before we found our place, okay? Probably around 10 times, I think, but I can't really remember. And at some point I was living with my nan and my mom because we didn't have a place to call our own at the time. And I experienced one of the luckiest things I ever had was I experienced a lot of unconditional love from my mom, nan, and other family members. And I was a very social and extroverted kid. However, because I was an only child and I just had my mom, I had to make lots of friends. So I actually became very good at making friends, which will be very funny because, as we're going to get to later, socializing was actually one of my weakest points. But at this point, it was not. So the skills had been built, but what came later was a lot of insecurities that made something that was really my strength to begin with, something that was one of my greatest weaknesses, okay? And the cracks started to appear really in my secondary school. And the cracks started to appear because, like I said, I was a very socially extroverted kid. But the school that I went to was not in the area that I wanted to go to. It was not in the area which I lived, because the area which I lived at the time was East London, and didn't have the best reputation, wasn't the safest, and the schools weren't very good. So my mum managed to find me a really good school a bit outside of London, or just on the outside of London. And this is when I got introduced to people who were very different to me, who lived in a different tax bracket to me, who had different interests and were raised in a different way, had different political opinions than me. And the main thing is it was quite far away. It was 45 minutes to an hour to get there. So it means the friends that I did make, I couldn't really hang around with because I had to come home. And then also because there was already a socio-economic divide, I didn't really feel like I could connect with many people there, which then led to all of my issues when it came to socializing, because I then made storylines around being insecure. I made storylines around not fitting in. I made storylines around being different. So this is how easy it can be to have your internal world dictate and even change things externally or internally that were already going good. Like I said, I was a very social and extroverted kid when I was quite young in primary school. So this is like grade school or something. But because of this big shift and because I didn't have the tools to deal with it, that's when cracks started to appear. And the other big thing, because we're skipping quite a lot this early foundations because it's not really too important, I watched my other friends get interested from girls and connect with friends much easier than I did, which led to all of these interjections and insecurities that I was developing, right? Especially around socializing, around dating, and around confidence in general. And as someone who was a very extroverted person, this was an especially painful feeling because I didn't fit in. So around the same time, this is when I started really getting into martial arts. It was something which I could get my aggression out of. It's something which I could push. I could work hard in. It's something where I could just forget the stresses of school and what I was going to do with my life, which were questions that were coming up quite a lot. So the thing I started with was Muay Thai. I trained 3 to 5 times a week, about an hour session at a time. I did a couple of burner fights, nothing big. It wasn't really a big competition thing. But it was still very valuable because I learned how to push through things when I was scared. I learned how to channel aggression. I learned how to work hard, really. This is where structure and working hard really came into its own for me. And then around 15, 16, around the same time that I started seeing my friends get interest from girls, but I didn't get any, I started getting into psychology, meditation, and philosophy. And another big thing was social dynamics in a company called RSD at the time. And alongside it was also Stoicism and Buddhism. I began to read everything that I could, but I also began to practice. Now, I wasn't very good at practicing. I could only really meditate at 1 to 2 minutes at the time. But then as I was getting older, 16, 17, 18, I also started to push myself socially much more than I would have before, encouraging me to get out of the box, encouraging me to get rejected more, encouraging me to get inoculated to social pressure in all kind of things. But the main thing is it got me out of my comfort zone. And then around this time period is when I started getting really serious into BJJ, which is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I actually started to compete quite a lot. Hours of hours on training. It culminated about 3 years in is when I started training 6 to 8 hours a day, almost every day. Now we're starting to get into the meat and potatoes of everything, right? Which is when the disciple is ready, the master will appear. Now, what this means is, well, here's a picture of me winning my first match at Worlds in Jiu-Jitsu. So we skipped through a few years. We skipped through all the building blocks, getting into being open. It's because up until now, this was all the foundations of becoming who I am. I already got interested in philosophy, Buddhism, social dynamics. I was already pushing myself socially. I was pushing myself in competition in martial arts, all of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I had found one of my biggest mentors, still one of my biggest mentors to this day, Pierre de Souza over at Unshakable. He was teaching a really interesting combination of masculine polarity, social dynamics, kind of tantra outside of the bedroom, Hindu meditation, Advaita Vedanta, and later what would come in was some more Buddhist meditation. And then what this would progress in even more is hypnotherapy, integral theory, and developmental psychology soon followed. And at the same time that I was pushing myself in martial arts, going to Euros, going to Worlds, also pushing myself in socializing situations, getting outside, because one of the things I didn't mention was that even though I was very extroverted, I had a lot of self-doubt. I was very shy. I wanted to connect with people, but I always felt like I was holding myself back. I always felt like in conversation, I was letting other people dictate rather than me adding something because I didn't believe what I had to say would either be taken seriously, respected, or be valuable. So I'd much prefer to just sit back, at least when I was in school, right? I started to become more and more out of my shell when I was doing these masculinity or these polarity-based practices, social dynamics, so going out, meeting people, getting social, all that kind of good stuff. And also it got taken to the next level when I started doing conversational hypnotherapy with my mentor, Pierre de Souza. And a really good example of this was just before I went to Worlds, I'll never forget it. He said, hey, I have this new framework. It's called Advanced Conversational Hypnotherapy by a person called Scott Jansen. Let's do a session together before your Worlds. Let's make sure your mind is right. It was an hour-and-a-half session, and it completely changed the frame of how I viewed competition. Up until then, it was a lot of anxiety, it was a lot of fear, it was a lot of hyping myself up, it was a lot of making myself be the big man all the time. The problem is when you make yourself the big man all the time, is the moment there's a small crack in that, you fall to that level that the bigness went to. So you inflate yourself up, but as soon as a crack appears, it just makes you fall back down to whatever level you are. And because you inflated yourself up so much, that fall appears much, much more turbulent and it appears much, much deeper. And we did this session, and it was one of the strangest sessions I've ever been into. I went super deep into hypnotherapy trance. I went super deep into my unconscious through the use of questions. What Pierre would do is he would hold me in this space and then ask me questions which I'd never even thought about or I'd never even thought to think about, right? Which is a whole other level of depth entirely. And what that did is when I went to the World Championships, I felt all the same nerves, all the same anxiety, but the difference is that they were not dictating my internal world. They were just a part of it. What that means in plain English is they were doing the exact job they're supposed to do. They were there to help me. They were there to sharpen my nerves. They were there to sharpen my reaction time. They were there for excitement. And what happened is this was the competition which I enjoyed the most. Now, I won my first match by submission and I lost my second match by submission. So I didn't win. But the way in which that competition ran its course was the best I've ever felt ever. In the highest stake game, in the highest stake game there was out there in Jiu-Jitsu at the time, something which I'd already invested thousands to go and compete because it was in America. I'm from the UK. This whole period I was grinding, I was cutting weight for Worlds, I was doing 8-hour days, I was also doing appointment setting because I had to support myself during this time period, because when you're an athlete, you don't really make any money. And I had to do appointment setting and sales on the side in order to make sure that I had money to train and support myself. And also it was during the last year of university. So I had all of this stuff going on and I was doing all my mentorship works with Pierre. This was really the grind period before the grind period. This was the grind period of a separate life, right? And what you can see is all of my early life foundations brought me to here. They brought me to being open to this kind of work. And as a result, looking back, this is one of the most transformational periods of my entire life. But what it showed me is this illusion that I had built jiu-jitsu into was not real. I got to the world championships. I competed at the highest level that I could at the time. I was just purple belt at the time, but it was the highest level that I could find. And it still fundamentally felt the same as when I was just competing in the random leisure center in the middle of the UK. Same excitement, okay? This was not something which was transformational or the thing that I was looking for. And the thing is, before you go through these periods, if you're going through this period, you don't really know what you're looking for until you do it. Which is why people that get trapped in analysis paralysis, why people that get trapped in their mind, why they feel like they lived more in their mind than they have in real life, it's because there needs to just be more of a doing. And this is what this period taught me, how you should just go out and do stuff, think about the consequences later, especially when you're younger, because you'll always be able to figure something out afterwards. I was always able to figure out how to pay for it. I was always able to figure out how to make something work. And then what this period taught me was that this was actually not the thing that I wanted to do. So it actually saved me so much time, effort, and money just from doing the thing. That's why it's actually more risky to stay in your mind rather than just go out there and do it. And I came back from Worlds and I was kind of just in an apathetic depression, not clinical depression, but I just felt a lot of apathy. And that apathy was towards training. I was still putting in the same amount of hours. I was still just going, but I was going just out of the pure discipline of it. I was showing up to the gym early as it opened just to drill with my friend and training partner at the time, Peter, just because of the discipline, just because I didn't know what to do if I didn't do that, okay? And that's when my mentor Pierre, who I was doing appointment setting for at the time, so I was doing appointment setting for a bunch of different companies until he offered me to work in his company and I said yes. And I got offered to train as a backup coach for his company's social stage at the time. It's now Unshakable. And I almost, before all of this, talked myself out of it. And the funny thing about this is because I almost did exactly like I just warned you about before. I was like, oh no, I'm already getting decent money from this other company. Is this really something that I want to do? But then I just said, yes, I know this is the right thing. Let me train to be a backup coach. Let me train to be a sales setter for Pierre just to see what happens. And it culminated to me flying out to Poland. I was originally supposed to go for 10 days. The first day when I landed, I just knew instantly that this is what I wanted to do. This is what I was looking for. There was just so much opportunity to grow. There was so much intrinsic knowing that this is what I wanted to do that I called my mum and I said, Mum, I'm not going to come back. And it felt like a liberation. It felt like a massive relief. It felt like this was the guidance that I wanted since I could remember. Because it was just freedom, living life on my own terms. Technically, I was living life on my own terms with jiu-jitsu, but I was still living with my mom, and I was still having to do this really crazy scheduling, which I placed on myself, which I wanted to do at the beginning, but it felt at the end much more like an obligation rather than what I actually wanted to do. And this is when I started my 2-year in-person apprenticeship. And this is when somebody joins the story, a little lady called Sister Kama, who's in this picture. So there's me, just before we do the retreat hosted by her, and this is her at a retreat, right? And she was living with us at the time. She was just supposed to come for like a 10-day retreat, but she ended up living with us for the rest of pretty much the 2 years, because she got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and we had to take care of her. And this is us taking care of her in Poland, right? And we were expected to sit for 90 minutes to 3-hour sits, do daily Dharma talks with meditation breakdowns. And then at the same time, we were still practicing all of the masculine, all of the polarity stuff with Pierre, Tantra outside of the bedroom, Tantra of the courtship phase. So we were going out socializing, practicing stabilizing states in meditation and doing integral life practice, all of that kind of good stuff. And then at the same time, because now I was no longer a backup coach, I was an actual coach, I had a massive amount of talent to be a hypnotherapist. So I was doing all the hypnotherapy calls and I was doing all of the hypnotherapy courses to be the dedicated hypnotherapist in this company. The offer was around 9K, working one-on-one with clients for long 6 and 9 month apprenticeships with them. It was also with men who were 2 to 3 times older than me, and I was helping them heal, solve, and overcome their deepest insecurities that they'd had for decades and never opened up to anyone else about this. So it was incredibly humbling and fulfilling and rewarding work. And then this is when we went to Budapest. We went to Budapest because there was a really good hospice there originally for Sister Kama. And we spent 3 months in total in Poland. Sister Kama ran her retreat, and then we went to Budapest. And this is when I really got into doing 3-hour sits, even more so than before, doing a daily shadow work practice, doing daily hypnotherapy sessions with clients, but also on myself. And this is when I got introduced to the lifestyle of feast, famine, and impermanence. So the feast months were sometimes we make 20K months. Famine months were sometimes we make 0K months. And then there was impermanence. The first part of Budapest was all about business, delivering, getting the product, getting us, our service, the best that we could. So constantly practicing, constantly being mentored by Pierre, constantly going to check in on Sister Kama in the hospice, where we'd go and we'd talk about the Dharma. And it was just constant socializing, practicing, networking, all of this kind of good stuff, right? But then there was the second half of Budapest, which was impermanence, okay? Which was the fact that Sister Kama and also my Nana at the same time were passing away. And the last 2 months with Sister Kama, we were reading a book called the Majjhima Nikaya, which in layman's terms is kind of like the Bible, but for Buddhists, it's the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, which is the suttas or the Dharma talks that the Buddha himself gave to the bhikkhus, to the monks. And the 2 suttas that we read every single day for the last 2 months to Sister Kama was the Anathapindikavata Sutta of 143 in the Majjhima Nikaya and the Chichaka Sutta 148, or the 6 sets of 6. The first one took 20 minutes to read, the last one took an hour. And the whole process was very sad, but also weirdly nourishing, because I was at the start of my journey whilst one of my most senior teachers was at the end of her journey. And through that whole process, we were able to see how she handled the most fundamental fear that everyone has, which is the fear of death, the fear of impermanence, the fear of passing away. And through that whole time, there was not a single flicker of doubt, a single flicker of fear, of anxiety, of this process that she was going through. It was one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen in my entire life. And it's something which I still get lessons, insights, and breakthroughs from, even up until now, all these years afterwards. And at this moment, the business and social stage was completely irrelevant. All that mattered was making sure that she was taken care of. So it was a massive love and state cultivation. It was also a massive equanimity practice. It was a test of everything that we'd learned up until then, how we were dealing with that. Because there was a lot of complexity going on with the business and a lot of uncertainty, a lot of financial insecurity. And it just water under the bridge. So it was anicca and death. Anicca is the Pali word for impermanence. And it felt like the true meaning of life, like witnessing, wow. In a weird way, death is the truest meaning of life. And it's an insight which I'm still wrestling with. And I'll probably do some insight chains on later. This was the start of going independent. This was the start of breaking away from being in the 2-year, super intimate, super complex, super stressful apprenticeship with Pierre. Something which I'm very grateful for, obviously. So the company broke up as soon as Sister Kama basically passed away, and everyone went their separate ways. And it's so funny. We have some people in Medellin right now. We have some people in Europe. We have some people in Asia grinding. We're all over the globe, right? But we're all still connected and we're all still really close. So this is when I started my business for the first time in my early 20s. No idea what to do. Started on Facebook. And I went to Thailand, a place which I'd never been to before, just to log in and to make sure that I got this figured out. Because I had a lot of financial insecurity. At this point, I was only making like 300 euro a month, something like that. And I just knew that if I put myself in that position where I had to make something work, then I would, right? Because I built all of the tools, I had that equanimity, I had something to fall back on. I knew that I could handle it. I knew I could handle the stress. So that's what I did. Super tumultuous time period, not to put it lightly. And there was a lot of triggers around money and instability because I never really had to address them before because I was working in the company of Social Sage beforehand, I never had to directly confront them. But issues around worth, value, confidence, self-belief, procrastination, self-sabotage, they never came up because I'd already done all the work on them. So the last 10% of issues that I still had to work on got cleaned up slowly with patience, compassion, and equanimity. And then this is when the path really started to deepen. I invested in a long-term shadow work intensive with Kim Barter, one of the psychotherapists of 30 years, who I think has the best model of therapy out there. Multiple thousands, I never had the money to invest before. Completely changed my model of shadow work, hypnotherapy, and developmental psychology. I was able to finally have a model which could integrate all of them. And this just created absolutely night and day difference in the breakthroughs I was able to create with clients. Because not only would it happen faster, but it would happen in a more complete way. Whereas before, if someone had an issue around procrastination, the procrastination would go, but they would still have all of these other issues. The way that this style works is not only does the procrastination go, but all of the issues linked to that procrastination also get healed at the same time, because it's about going to the root cause of what is actually how this issue even began in the first place. Also, it gives space for spirituality and other mental styles of mentorship to be included as well, whereas in a lot of hypnotherapy and NLP systems, that doesn't happen. There's just room for one system, and it's the hypnotherapy or NLP system in and of itself. And like I said, massive client breakthroughs, and the breakthroughs stayed permanently, and the shifts were much deeper. So just better in all areas of life. So here's a bulletproof list of the full framework, which you can take right now. It's got all the methodologies and it's got all the lineages that I come from. I recommend that you read and you research all of them, because this is what helped my practice the most. This is what helped the breakthroughs I've seen and facilitated in my clients. I can't recommend it enough. So who this channel is for and why I wanted to share this is hopefully this journey was relatable to some people, right? How there's kind of so much chaos, there was so much opening, there was kind of this loads of highs and lows, there was loads of places where you didn't really know what was going to come next. It's for people who share the same core wound that I had when I was growing up, right? Which was feeling different, feeling isolated, kind of feeling misunderstood and not being able to connect with people around, and not having clear guidance about how to actually structure their life and where they want to go. People who've done all the work but still feel fundamentally the same. People who feel like they constantly hold themselves back, but they don't know why. And for people who have external success, but they still feel empty. All of this stuff is what this channel is made for. And luckily you have something that I don't, which is the biggest ROI thing in my entire journey was being able to see, rewire, and heal my deepest unconscious insecurities, beliefs about the world. So self-sabotage, procrastination, and anxiety. With this system and framework, these things will no longer affect you, and no longer will they no longer affect you, but all the other small issues or big issues that are dependent on these issues to stay alive, to stay active inside you internally, they can also get removed. Because this is how a fundamental character flaw, which we just feel that we're stuck with, I'm just not a confident guy. I'm just not a social guy. I'm just not someone that can work multiple hours in a day. I'm just not someone that is really that structured. All of this stuff is something that we can not only rewire, but we can integrate and transcend from. And the system that enables all of this in the most effective way that I've seen is completely for free. The most practical guides to shadow work on the internet, the step-by-step guide on how to create meaningful and permanent change within yourself, your relationships, and your life as a whole. I made it completely free. It's in the comment below. It's in the description box below. This is the thing which I wish I had on my journey sooner, because I would have got through it much, much quicker and in a much, much less tumultuous way. Sign up, it's completely free. I'll send you a follow-up email to make sure you're having the best experience possible. Otherwise, welcome to this channel. Very warmly, Aaron.